All right, so we are going to talk about the licensing technical approach. This is part 3 and probably the final piece, at least for now. And I'm just going to get started here. Let's share my screen. All right, so we've, in the first two discussions, we talked about activating a license sync and syncing a license. And what's left to really discuss is the transition for people that have that already have a license, how to get them into a sync process. So here's kind of what I've thought through, and we can discuss any of the open topics, and feel free to stop me at any point if you have questions. Okay, so let's see, the first bullet, well, so I have a screenshot here of what the current license page looks like. And if you remember, actually, let me pull up this document real quick. Projects, just the mock-up. And I'll blow up this page so you can see the difference between the two. This bigger. So if you look here, the new page is under a subscription like menu item in the admin area. And the existing page is a license menu item. And so transitioning that, could be a little strange for users and we can talk through that in a little more detail, but I just wanted to highlight the visual difference there.
I wonder if do we need to have a different page, or could it be just the same page, same location they're used to? We just change the content of it based on kind of their setup.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess it's a question. Do we want to call it subscription, or license? We could, potentially you could go ahead and change that now if we wanted to go with subscription. It might be a little misleading, but
yeah, I think we use license so much that it would be odd, especially if you think of the transit. I mean, we should talk with Tim to understand kind of the thought behind the original change there, but okay. I would be fine with, I think, with keeping it license, and because we're not really changing the model so much.
I'll add a point there. I'll see.
I don't know if that complicates things development wise, if it's better to have them kind of separate, but
no, it would be probably the same amount of effort either way. Maybe a little bit simpler actually if we just keep it the same, but it's not too terrible either way.
Yeah, maybe it just gets called license sync if they have sync turned on. I don't know. We should talk with Tim. That's
okay.
Probably a to-do. I'm just gonna call this out.
Okay. Okay, so the decision on whether to allow offline syncing, we're going to assume no offline sync for now, like the manual sync. That's what we had decided before. For customers with the legacy license and the sync features enabled, so I imagine we'll wrap this whole thing in like a feature flag. Assuming the feature flag is turned on and a customer that has a legacy license, the license admin page would be accessible. So basically I'm saying like this page that we're looking at here would still be shown without showing the newer version. And that'll be based on a toggle or a link or whatever we want to show there. But basically we want to add a link or a toggle to this page somewhere so that the people can choose to go to the sync model with some text saying what would happen. And I'm describing here that the new subscription admin page would not be visible, but I guess kind of what we're saying is it's the same page, but really it's just the content is the old version. And we'll talk to Tim.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it's what I'm thinking, but I mean, maybe Tim took that approach for a reason I just don't know yet.
Yeah. Okay, so when the customer enables the sync, basically they hit that toggle. What happens in my mind was the existing legacy license would stay in place. So it would still allow them to have the same, license features that they're used to. while they're trying to set up the new one. And I wasn't quite sure where we would persist that setting of whether the sync is enabled or not. My thought was it would go in application settings. That's like a GitLab thing in the EE code that we can look into, but I think that might be a place where we could store it. But basically, we just need to persist that somewhere.
Is there any potential conflict with the existing legacy license staying in place for like the use case of they got a refund, we don't want them to have these features anymore, or they didn't pay, like for us being able to kind of set them back into
right,
an E or or I'm sorry, a CE or kind of a read-only mode like we do today?
well, yeah, it's a good question. Some of it's like process. When we say that we're going to keep the old license version in place, I sort of assumed it means not really touching like what happens there. So as long as we support that, then they're always going to have that to go back on unless we make changes to that flow as well.
Yeah, maybe it's something for a subsequent iteration, because I think we
Yeah.
do need to solve for that ultimately. And even to your question on like the toggle setting where it would live, I think to start, probably the users have the control, but let's say we had this out for 6 months, it's solid, we're not really having any issues, we want to get more people over, we may want to explore a setting that's only on our side, that like you have to contact us to get onto the legacy licensing model. I don't know, but I can see
Okay.
us wanting to make it we have to have a conversation with us
Or
if you want, like,
restrictive. Yeah.
yeah, like just not letting it just, because otherwise we may not see the adoption we need to have this have the impact that we want.
Yeah.
Theoretically we should, because we'll make the renewals process easier and true ups and all that, but there's a lot of value in us, in customers being set up this way for us and for them. And so we may ultimately want to explore it's like a toggle in Salesforce or something that fires it off and that's it.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
just kind of
So,
context to think about. I don't think we need that for like a MVC first iteration at all.
okay.
But just want another one of those, like, let's not paint ourselves into a corner or make it too difficult for ourselves to go that way down the road if we choose to.
Yeah. And I guess it doesn't seem like we're going to make it any worse if we don't tackle it right now, because we're just basically talking about changing the existing
Right.
workflow a little bit. So, okay, cool.
Yeah, I would like to get it out there kind of almost like a soft, like a soft launch, not really
Yeah.
soft, but like in a way where both are running in parallel. If there's issues, someone can easily fall back to the existing model. And then once
Okay.
we feel really confident, like this thing is solid and we've beat it up enough to kind of push it out, that we can do that.
Okay, cool. Let's see. So basically at this point, after they've toggled the new sync feature, the existing license admin page would be hidden, assuming we have good language to support that, or basically we would hide the old content, show the new content. And the user would be redirected to the new page, or would just be shown the new page content, what we're talking about. Okay, so next, the customer, basically they're shown this page that we've looked at before. This is the same activation page as before. So after they've toggled it on, they'll see it here, and they'll have to activate like any other customer would at this point. I guess I can talk through this a little bit, just to kind of remind what the decision point is for activation codes. If we decide to use activation codes and include them on this, and we want to include the activation code on the subscription card that's in the customer's app, then they would just need to go find that activation code for the existing license that's out there, if that makes sense. So yeah, just
They
to
log into the portal, they copy the string, they paste it into their instance, and from there on it's synced.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Which
what
is
that
actually pretty similar to the initial license install for anyone today, right? They
it,
copy and paste a string into the instance and they just have to do that manually. So what we're solving for now is that they just do that once theoretically.
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And what that means is we'd have like a migration to backfill all the existing subscriptions that have licenses with activation codes, which is not a problem. It's just another little task to do.
Is there so this may be a stupid question. Is there a reason to have an activation code different than what the license string already is?
Um, I hadn't considered it. There may not be a downside to that. I mean, it would be different than the like kind of workflow for the new one. So, and it's really not that much effort to add the activation code. So this keeping the strategy the same for new kind of new subscriptions versus the old ones might be nice just to keep it standard. I guess
Yeah,
my
it was
my
just a question.
yeah, yeah. Oh, and then like the alternative to this approach was, and this could be a later iteration, instead of having the activation code thing here, if we had the way just like to log into the customer portal from here and show them the available subscriptions with licenses, they could just select it and then it would just be tied at that point rather than having them copy and paste something. But again, that's probably a later iteration type feature.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, from this point forward, the steps should be similar to starting a license sync that we've already covered. So yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot else to really discuss there unless there's questions. I have some questions that follow this. And I think we've covered this first one. Do we prefer an opt-in strategy for license instances? It seemed
Yeah, I
that,
think at least to start.
yeah, seemed that way to me.
Yeah, I think if we push this out, we'd uncover a bunch of issues that would be bad. I'd rather
Yeah.
have the opt-in, see what the adoption is that we get, and then like we can have reach out to people who aren't to see why and get some context, and then figure out other iterations. But I
Okay.
think if this was just like, hey, we're changing everything, and you're going to be like read only if you don't figure this out in the next 2 weeks, like that would be I don't think that would be a good experience for
Right.
customers or for our internal folks that have to support them.
Cool. Let's see. Is there a way to link a license or subscription/order to a license? Um, I was wondering about this just for the migration purposes. I don't know that we actually ended up needing it, but if we do, I think there's a way we could do it. It's a little, it's not exactly straightforward. There's kind of a loose association where you could tie all, using all three apps, so like GitLab, Customers app, and the license app. It's probably not really important to go into now since we don't really need it. I thought through ways to automatically activate a license. So like when a user goes and they're on this page, they have an existing license, they hit the toggle, instead of going to this page where they enter the activation code, it basically would just go to the place where it's already activated. But I was trying to think through a way to do that. And I think it's possible, but I think there's plenty of downsides to doing it, at least initially. So we could like certainly add this later.
I mean,
But
that
if,
would be, so it sounds like they really, in this scenario you're proposing, we could do is I just hit the toggle and they don't have to do anything else and it's sync.
that's my idea.
I mean, that's ideal. That's like with anything we build in software, like one click and
Sure.
done and all the magic happens. Like that would be amazing. I think that would help adoption a ton because you know how it is. You're like in between meetings.
Yeah.
You've got maybe 5 minutes. Like, okay, I can do that. But as soon as it's like, no, now you need to stop and log. You're like, no, I don't have time for this. I got to do something else. Like I can just see the fact of having to go to the portal, remember your login, get in there, copy the string, paste. Like that's enough friction where it could, if we could do this approach, I think we'd see much better adoption.
Okay, well, I could definitely make an issue for it. I think it's feasible based on that loose association. Basically, what we would do is take the license key that they have. It would be sent in a request to the customer's app, which would do a search within the license app, find the Zora subscription, send it back to the customer's app, and then go through the process that way. So there's steps we can take to make that happen, I think.
Yeah, let's
yeah.
try to shoot for it, and if it's becomes too large, or it's, it doesn't necessarily need to be part of the first iteration, but I do think like that is the ultimate like great solution. I just say, yeah, I want that thing, and then it's done.
Cool. Let's see, that's it for my questions related to that section. I didn't decide to like plan out the offline sync, which actually sounds okay based on our conversations.
Tyler, one thing, so we were talking just now about having just that, that button and you mentioned that you need to log into the customer's app. Is it possible to authenticate the user from somehow, from the instance itself? And this is probably related to, to the work the other people were doing.
Right. So my thought there was that we wouldn't necessarily do this on a first iteration. It's more like, if we feel like we want to have it up front, then we can explore this. It would make some things easier, I think, for the user, just to be able to like see things from the customer's app without ever leaving GitLab. But yeah, it would tie into the work that I guess acquisition is working on. I wonder if.
Yeah, I mean, if we have like a token that that we can use, and as long as we just check anything with that token, then we might be able to do it. I don't know how safe it is, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would have to have some sort of authentication around it, because we want to show them basically we'd want to show them the subscriptions that they've paid for, and associate, one of them, the instance to one of the ones that they've paid for, and we'd want to have some kind of security around that. If you think so, James, do you think this is something that's worth exploring up front, or do you think we should go with the activation code strategy for now?
No, I mean, just definitely a follow up. I think unless it's straightforward, of course, but it might be useful. I mean, it might be useful to get the user in the instance to not to log in, to do certain actions at all in the customer's app. So if they can be done through their own instance, then I think that'd be great, because then they just don't have to do the extra logging there. But definitely follow up, or just something for later.
Okay. Well, I mean, if we want to explore it now, I'd hate to like invest all this time into an activation code strategy where we just ditch it, shortly after. So it may not be all that much more effort to like look into this strategy now. Just maybe we could have a task just for investigating the, or like working with acquisition basically to figure out that authentication. It sounded like they were punting on it, at least initially, because of the fact they don't need it for purchasing. That's what Jeremy was saying to begin with. But eventually they'd need it. So I don't know if it would be us tackling it first, or before them.
Yeah, I think it might be worth, because it doesn't look like we may not have to do a lot more effort, basically, if we already have that, or if that's implemented. So it might be worth at least exploring, or knowing that that option might be there.
Okay. All right. Good to know. I'll create an issue for that separately, just to like investigate that. Tying the instance or authenticating the instance into the customer's app. Cool. Okay. Then I had overall questions down here, the miscellaneous questions. Some of these came from the spike task, which I actually think came from earlier meetings that we had, and some are from me. So this first one, if we want the customer's portal being the single source of truth for synced licenses, are we okay with having license information in the customer's portal as well as the license app? We've talked about for a while merging the two, but at least for the shorter term, it's going to be in two places now.
I think a question actually should be, well, I'm going to answer your question with a question.
Okay.
Do we want the customer's portal to be the single source of truth?
I mean, to me, it seems like the end goal would be to have everything in the customer's portal, because separating them has caused, headache, and it's not like a whole lot gained from having it separate, at least from my vantage point. There might be business reasons to have them separate, but yeah.
I mean, for me, I actually would, in a perfect world, I don't think we'd have a portal.
Okay.
But I know that for people who have closed networks and air-gapped instances, we will need it. But I think for the majority of folks, I would like to, everything just happens in the instance. There's like a billing page or like if you go and use GitLab.com, for instance, like having it be a similar experience.
Right.
Or even, if you go and use GitHub and actually you do pay within their app, you don't go to a separate login.
So you're talking about having a portal that's not customer facing. It would just be like an admin interface to the data that we're tracking in there.
Something like that. I mean, I think that's very long term. Like that's not the problem to solve right now.
Yeah.
I think it's a fair question. But I don't know, is that any different than today? The portal being the single source of truth versus the synced license. I mean, versus the license app. Like what is a single source of truth today?
So right now, just for licenses, people just go to the license app, and we don't have any like strictly license information in the portal.
So the portal calls out the license app when someone says like download license, copy license.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I think it's still got some, there's some technical issues there because of that. I think the fact that you still retrieve the licenses through the customer portal, then it means that we just have the license app to generate licenses basically, which is not like a big thing. And then it's not customer facing, the license app. So if we want to build some more, some more tools for those licenses, then it means that we're going to have to add more APIs to the license app instead of just doing everything in the customer portal. And it's hard to maintain, both two apps rather than just one. Basically, we have to keep up with security issues in both of them. We have to upgrade both of them.
Yeah.
So I think technically it probably makes sense to just have a single one. Yeah.
So then, James, are you okay with like starting that process with these new sync licenses only being in the customer's app, and then the legacy licenses being in the license app?
Yeah, I think that's not a big trouble because we just have, we just keep the same APIs. We don't have to do anything for the old stuff while we build something new in the customer portal. So, I think it's okay, and we may want to deprecate the license app eventually, once we know that everything is working with the sync and so.
Okay. It's definitely like a step in the direction that we want to go. And it might push us towards eventually moving all the license stuff over. Okay, so next there was a question in the Spike task for how we generate licenses. I didn't really exactly follow what was meant by that question, but I sort of put some thoughts together on this.
I mean, I think that was me who threw that in there just as the basic, like, we need to know how to do that, whatever
Okay.
that is. So it
Yeah.
wasn't from like a technical background perspective or anything like that. It was really like, this is just one of the things we have to have check this box before we can do this thing.
And the we in this question would be GitLab, like an admin type person generating a license, or just how does the app
The
generate?
system. Yeah.
Okay.
How
So
we haven't figured it out. I think sounds like you have that figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't touch on that too much. How can we check if a license is still valid? And this is sort of with the new admin panel that we would be adding to the customer's app. I would imagine we'd have a customer section where you could like drill down into like a specific subscription for a customer and then see the usage over time. There's a question about the Zora iframe and purchasing within an instance. And I just chose not to like tackle that for now, since purchasing is something that we can definitely do in a later iteration. And frankly, I just don't know much about that. And James,
Could some sort of API as well.
Right. You're saying basically the API would just communicate with the customer's app, and then from there we would communicate with Zora.
Exactly. I think, I mean, if acquisition is already working on having some token to communicate, the self-managed instance to the customer portal, maybe we can have that the API that also does those things.
Okay. And then the last question I had here was really raised by James. This is kind of a technical one, just like how we want to handle versioning. Since we have kind of a new situation here where the self-managed instance, which is, versioned separately, needs to make requests to the customer's app. We'll need to think about how we want to manage versions and what we support there. This is a whole new management of an API that we haven't really had to deal with in the customer's app. So we'll just have to be thoughtful about that going forward. Doesn't really answer how, but I think we can probably kind of tiptoe into it. Just keeping.
Yeah, I think we could just probably. I was going to say I think we could just keep just do something very basic at the beginning, like the usual V0 or something, and then in the future we can think about it. We need to if we have to have different versions and stuff, then we can think about it. But I think we probably need to have the basic structure from the beginning, like having like an API that tells you the version or something, and then when it's needed, we can think about that later.
Okay. And then let's see. Let me hide this for a second.
I also have one question. I'm not sure. Maybe we answered this already somehow in previous meetings, but I was just thinking about the communication between a self-managed instance and the customer portal. How do we know instance A is instance A and not instance B? Was the authentication, or was the what will tell us that is a specific instance and not another, or I don't know, to prevent any man in the middle attacks or similar as well.
So is also the concern there, like we want to be able to tie one physical instance to a subscription and not allow multiple instances use a subscription?
Actually, no. I was more thinking about the security aspect of it. Like, when we do the sync, what prevents someone to, imagine if the request is really easy or something, then they can send us, random requests to do the sync with data that is not valid or is funny, and then I have 0 users, so I can just use as many as I want, things like that.
So one thing I was thinking is we could just the security aspect of it out, just to like keep the sync requests secure, was mostly just the authentication token that we had talked about. There may be another level of security we need to prevent it, but basically ensuring that, I mean, every instance is going to have a auth token after they activate. And so future sync requests will have that auth token. And if they don't, they won't get in.
Right. Yeah. Would that get updated? Like, will it always be the same token, or?
Well, so I was thinking it would be the same. I'd also debated about whether or not we would refresh it with each sync, so we could do that. That might be, slightly more secure. So, we have an auth token that's created when they activate, and then on the first sync request, they use that auth token, and in the response, we return a new auth token that they could use in the next sync. That type of thing. Do you favor that?
Yeah, I would say it makes sense to have something like that. Yeah, yeah. And also just the basics, like, HTTPS and everything that should be there. I don't know if it's something else. I think one thing that we may have to take into account is that there were a few issues raised by security, in terms of things that we should do with the license and stuff that we currently have. I think some of them may not, from my perspective, may not make sense, because I don't think the ultimate goal should be to, definitely prevent users to tweak their self-managed instance to not have the license, have everything in E, because that's going to be pretty easy to do. But more in terms of security, so for instance, we don't, we don't have like man-in-the-middle attacks or someone pretending to be, a different customer, or, doing funny things to the customers because of that. That's my main concern, but not so much, someone being able to just avoid having to pay the license, because that's always going to happen, and it's pretty easy. Even if we, if we put many restrictions there, it's pretty pointless, because everything is open source, and they will just comment, a line of code, and then they will get everything in there. So I'm not concerned about that at all, and I think this was raised by security as well, but I'm definitely not concerned about that, because it's very easy to do anyway. But I'm more concerned about things like man-in-the-middle attacks and things, that because of the communication between self-managed and the customer app, there's going to be a bunch of customers communicating, and then, what if they get the API and they send us, a request for doing something funny and block a lot of customers, for instance? Like, imagine if they just look through that somehow and send some sync that makes it that everyone has 1,000 more users or something like that, and then, suddenly, we block everyone there because of that, or,
Right.
just something funny that may happen there. That's my only concern.
All right. Yeah, I'll have to do probably some additional investigation around that. I can also create an issue to do some of that investigation. It could be added as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, definitely a follow up. I mean, I don't think we're going to have to have it like perfect in the beginning anyway, like,
Right.
all secure and everything. But I think it's something that we may need to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about in our last 8 minutes here is just make sure we've covered these major topics. And I think we have, so let me go through it real quick. So we talked about the opt-out. How do we want to authenticate requests from the instance to the customer's app? Yeah, we talked about the auth token strategy. How often do we want to sync? Do we ever say how often, or do we want to punt on this decision for now and just go with a daily sync?
I think what we said was daily, but is there a way to like push a change if there is a change?
Yeah.
Like if they add users, can we update it immediately, whatever? So that we can always have
one thing here.
Accounts accurate.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, if we can do it from the customer's app, then that'd be great, because then we can change that for the customers. if that makes sense.
Yeah, explain that just a little bit, James.
Yeah, sorry. So I was thinking about it at the same time, but basically, say the daily sync. Obviously, the easiest thing to do is just having in the GitHub code. So when someone downloads this, installs the thing, they have this configuration in the GitHub instance, and then they could tweak it out, but that would be local. But what if, as part of the sync, we send the sync frequency as well? Like, so that is dynamic, as in instead of having that option, which might be configurable as well for them, but we have like an override, where change that remotely. Like when they do the sync, we send them like, oh, and by the way, this is the sync frequency that we want to have. And that will allow us to change this real time, basically, and to tweak it if you have any problems. And it can even save us if like the instance is down, and then, or I don't know, to avoid many requests or things like that.
Okay.
It could be something that we may want to do later as well. I don't think it's particularly difficult because it's just like an override of a some sort of setting, but maybe worth exploring. I think it will give us a good way to tweak this and see changes like real time.
Okay. Cool. Let's see, how long can licenses be out of sync? We talked about this a little bit. If we allow manual sync, does the grace period change? We talked about not doing the grace period. I'm going to just remove, or the manual sync, so I'm going to remove this. I feel, I have to go back through my notes, but I feel like we talked about having a grace period, at least for now. So this grace period would be separate from the kind of overall license grace period. Potentially this would just take the place of it. Use, and we'll just go with 2 weeks for now. We can adjust it as we go.
And again, another thing we might be able to tweak remotely as well.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, since we have this information is sort of baked into the license key, we can tie in anything we want at the time of sync to send them back a new license key that includes a different grace period. So I'll just put a default there. Okay. Are others comfortable with the strategy of augmenting? I think we pretty much are. We've talked about this. Basically adding additional information to the license key.
So like the seat counts and things like that?
This would be like adding the type of license it is. So if it doesn't have a type, it's obviously legacy. If it says sync, then it'll be a sync license. And then there's information about the grace period. The sync grace period would be in there. And potentially like we were talking about the sync frequency, we could include that information in the key.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything controversial
there. And then how do you want to facilitate plan upgrades? So we
probably out of scope for V1, I would say.
Yeah.
The same, like let's not paint ourselves in a corner where this would be hard to do down the line, but
yeah, I guess for now
we solve for it.
Yeah, for now we could just allow them to deactivate and reactivate until we figure out a smooth transition there.
Yeah, I mean, if you are able to figure out that like one click, everything works magically, I wonder if there's a way to leverage that for upgrades as well. Like just, hey, refresh kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. Okay.
I know we're like coming up on time here.
Yeah.
I think we're all meeting actually in 2 minutes for a separate discussion. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Tyler. So thorough. I really want to start moving on some of this work in 12.9 if possible.
Okay.
So
yeah, I'm going to start.
and-
I planned out like carving up some issues today to get them in there, and
Okay.
then I'm sure you'll see them, or I could CC you on them, or just send you a ping in Slack whenever it's ready.
I think I'll see him, but why don't you CC Amanda on all of them? I don't know if she's set up to get all the notifications yet for whenever anything's added in fulfillment.
Okay.
So I want to make sure she's aware. But just, you know, I would like to see if we can maybe even take on like 25 points of weight related to
Okay.
this effort. Just for context, like that's, I'm thinking we want to have maybe half of our bandwidth in the back end on this. And maybe even some front end stuff if we can. I mean, in terms of like an MVC, if there is something that we could ship at the end of 12.9, that would be cool as well. But
Okay.
we can figure that out as we go.
And I'll just add them to this epic that we have, the MVP.
Yes, yeah, that's the one. Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. Well,
Awesome.
thanks everybody for joining, and we'll catch up later.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler.
All right.
Good
See ya.
stuff. Latest. Bye bye.